This is session 1, guys. Okay, here we go. This is the start. We're going to start basic. We're going to start simple. We're going to talk about space. That's right. Not outer space, but the space that we design within. Usually it's a frame of some kind, but we divide up that frame in an interesting way by using objects or elements within that space, and that's called designing a composition. That's going to be very strategic for us as artists, very key and fundamental as we start to go into creating designs for visual concepts and bigger storytelling elements like doing storyboards and things like that. So we're going to start with the basics. We're going to talk about space and composition and framing. Let's get into it, all right? Here we go. Designing within a frame. Okay, thank you guys for joining me again. This is session 1. This is where it begins. We're going to take a deep dive into what is a frame, how do we think about a frame, how do we think about designing within space. So let's get right into that. I'm working in Photoshop, by the way, so if I seem a little awkward, it's because I'm trying to click on my right images here and it gets a little confusing to tell you the truth. Okay, so here is working within a frame. Space is what we design in. So it's not outer space, but I kind of wanted to do that image. We are controlling that space by putting a frame around it that gives us an area to design within. We're not designing in the whole world. We're designing in an area that our audience is focused into. And it could be a lot of things. We'll get into that in a moment. But that area that we are working in, we have to create designs, and we get to utilize several different elements, things in our design and of our composition. We create design utilizing elements such as line, shape. Shape is anything that's thicker than a line at a certain point. And then form. Form is something that's more three-dimensional. It has shading to it usually that makes it feel more three-dimensional. So these elements within a frame, we can create, utilizing these elements, we can create a composition, and that could be something very out there, like something that's kind of more like fine art, and it's more of an aesthetic of shapes and designs. That's a great way to start too, to have an understanding of breaking up a frame, utilizing shapes. I mean, I like this little swirly thing that brings you into the frame, and there's a tension point right here where it's almost touching that line. Then there's like this one, which is a very traditional cartoon layout, right? With this little fox character or bunny or whatever he is in the woods. We see that as a very pictorial thing. It's cartoony, but it also represents life that we know because we're seeing objects like trees and grass and bushes and an animal. Same thing here. This is more of a traditional, could be a painting or something like that. We use composition in painting also, but this is more like a cowboy kind of thing. It's a very graphic image. Or it could be something very ethereal too, right? It could be soft and doesn't have to have line. It could be just forms and shapes and color. I'm not really going to dive into color in this video series. That's almost a lecture unto itself, and there's some great ones that you can find online. But we will be, so I'll be mostly working in animation and using frames that we would recognize from movies and such, okay? So let's go to our next one. Composition. So we just mentioned composition. What is that? Well, it's the art of arranging elements in a frame in an appealing way. We as designers, because that's ultimately what we are as artists too, is we're creating designs. We want it to appeal to our audience. So appeal is it's a very elusive thing. It can be very subjective, an opinion kind of thing. But we as humans, we think a certain way, and we find certain things attractive and appealing that are universal. So we're going to kind of stay in that area of what universal appeal is. So we talked about a frame. A frame can be a lot of things based on the format of the composition. Okay, and when I'm talking about format, I'm talking about, well, like for comic strips or Instagram or Weibo in China, a lot of social media like a square format. So we work within a square frame. There's a circle frame that are used for a lot of things like this family circus gag. Books and posters tend to be an elongated vertical rectangle for books and posters and covers. Film and TV, which we're mostly going to be concentrating in this series because that's my background of being animation, a director, a storyboard artist and all that, and an animator. I like to work in this rectangle. I'm very used to that. So we'll talk more about rectangles. And then there's like an organic frame, because some illustrations, particularly like children's books and things like that, they don't have a frame necessarily drawn around them, but it's an organic kind of, we feel a frame because the end of the illustration tends to be the frame itself. So it's still contained within a space. It doesn't just go on for miles and miles. There is an organic frame that's there that we perceive at the end of the illustration. All right, let's talk a little bit about our composition within the frame. So here again is a rectangle horizontal, and there is such a thing as feeling balance within the frame. So this is again more of a design element, but you want your illustration, your drawing, whatever it is, to feel balanced within the frame so it doesn't feel like it's uneven. And it's a kind of a weird aesthetic that you get kind of used to a little bit. And we'll talk about there's certain frame compositions that work better for film and animation and illustration and even photography. And we'll get to that in a moment. But in general, you want to feel like there's not all the weight of the drawing on one side or on the bottom of the frame. It should feel like there's a certain balance within that frame and that composition. That's appealing to us. As viewers, you want to be appealing to your viewers, so you want to be able to have a balanced, well-composed design in your frame. So this is an example of the tree being representative as positive space, a positive illustration that takes up a lot of the weight of this frame. And the bird is central as a focal item, and he works great that way, but to balance out the frame, you can see I've added these little bushes, another little tree, very background, thinner lines that helps recede it back into the frame a little bit more. Thicker lines come towards us a little bit more. So we'll get more into that too when we're talking about depth. But that's balancing your composition. So here it is. Here's some of those frame compositions that are very popular. We see this in live action films, in animation, TV, I mean, you name it. This is just good, appealing design. So here are some layout. It's good to kind of know this up front, that there's some kind of preferable frame ways to break up your frame. So not only does it feel balanced, but it also has an appealing way of putting together your design elements within your frame. These are some of the most popular ones, but this first one, a frame split into thirds, and you can see there's like this area, this area, this area, but also up here, this way, this way. Just from a 2D perspective, this is a very popular way to break up a frame, and I have some examples we'll get to with all of these. But it's really hard sometimes just to start with a blank frame. So just to have these in mind when you start a composition, a story concept that you want to illustrate, it's good to start here. Frame split into fourths, where each one of these become kind of segments of design. Split frame, where there's maybe just two sides to it, or an oval frame, which is kind of a vignette. And this could be a really subtle thing, and I'll show you in the next design or the next example. But maybe there's a shading around here, and it really breaks the frame into more of an oval feel as opposed to a hard edged frame like this. And this could be a way of breaking up your composition also. So those are all frame compositions. And here's some great examples from live action, okay, some from film. And I could have brought up even more from animation too, but these were some really good go-tos of movies that you might have seen, like The Rear Window is a great example. But this is a great example of how the director, Hitchcock, broke this frame up into thirds. And he put the heroine here and the main hero here. He's in a wheelchair in that story, so that's why he's really low and she's high. So you get this nice dynamic in the frame this way, but also see how the crosshairs of the thirds touch their focal point, which in this case are their faces. A lot of times we'll talk about It'll be just kind of an understood in this lesson that the face of the character tends to be our focal point as an audience. We always look at the eyes because that's the window to the soul. That's where the expression is. That's where a lot of storytelling is in the face. So we like to showcase in our compositions the faces. Here's an example of fourths where this great design here is brought up here, where it really is about him in the foreground here, breaking that frame into half. But also this doorway, this exit area, is really impactful in the frame also. And therefore it kind of weights it equally like that. And these are split frames that are great examples. And then if you know Wes Anderson, the director, he loves to do very flat compositions. This is very kind of mirrored on both sides, both of these. And it's kind of split down the middle where we're very focused on that eye line or that character in each one of these split frames. And then there's this oval. Okay, so this is a good example of how to use that oval. Almost everything around this frame is kind of grayed out. It's darker. There's a pool of light that's showcasing what's the most important focal point or element to concentrate in this frame. And so that's a good example of creating a composition. And like I said, this is all designed. The cameraman isn't just putting up a camera and hoping that it has a good design aesthetic. These are purposeful in live action movies and then in animation and drawing and illustration, like we're going to talk more about. We have to think about these things. You put forethought into creating these elements because we are guiding the audience's eye. Our audience is anybody that sees our art. That's our audience. They're our viewers, right? Here's some more examples that I did of how to break up a frame into thirds. And you can see again, I'm using a cross point here is usually like an eye line or a main character that I want to hit. I put them up in here as opposed to just like everything flatly in the middle of the frame. So I'm using my thirds to break up my composition. This one is nice because it really showcases, this is supposed to be kind of a rooster in the morning and a church here. And so it's relating to, he's waking up whoever's in this building, this church. And you can see I'm using kind of a low angle here too. We'll talk more about that. It can be used, thirds can be helpful in a very abstract way when we're just talking about shapes and forms. So this is a great example of a balanced composition with could be lines and tones or colors or shapes, but it creates a design. And look at this great tension point here that we have that's hitting right in the thirds crosshairs. Of course, this big dab of a circle shape. Here is like a foreground character running and a background character running. We get some nice depth there because of scale. We'll talk more about that. But see how he in the foreground is hitting a nice thirds area, and then this character here too. And then this cowboy, of course, we're really locked into. We're going to read that face first, and then the other area is going to be he's shooting his gun, so that's in a nice thirds area also. That's all by design. We do those things intentionally. Another great element that we work with when we're talking about designing our composition is positive and negative space. Oftentimes we concentrate on the positive and we don't think about the negative, but really you should think about your composition within that rectangle or whatever that frame is existing together as positive and negative, and that they weight each other well. This is a great example, I think, of how the cowboy and the little piece of this barn or whatever really helps to weight the frame with the positive. But then look at what happens when we shade in the negative. Oftentimes the negative is air, sky, whatever doesn't have a certain detail to it and is maybe just a gradient or a flat color or something like that is the negative space. But see how that weights pretty well too within the frame. So you want to see both and help to create a balanced frame with both. All right, guys, this brings us to assignment number 1. So we've talked about composition within a frame. Let's keep to that rectangle frame when we talk about this assignment here. And what I'd like for you guys to do is draw out rectangle shapes on a piece of paper or within Photoshop or Procreate or whatever you want to use, and just utilizing a circle, a rectangle, a triangle, and maybe a couple lines, create different variations within a frame of a design. So, and remember, you can use scale, so they're not all the same size. You could do a small circle or big circle or a long line or even a curved line. Just use lines and shapes to create 4 different balanced compositions right now. I'm going to pause for a minute so you can do the assignment, and then I'll take a stab at it myself. Okay, we're back, and let me see. So I'm going to just start to break up the frame a little bit. I'm going to do kind of a rectangle, but I'm also we're going to talk more about leading lines within a composition in a minute. Let me make sure my opacity is good. Okay. So I'm going to lead with a couple shapes like this. I'm going to lead our eye into the frame, and I'll do a real positive shape here of a rectangle. I really want this to be darker. There we go. And these could be colored, they could be filled in with color. Look at this nice swooping shape here that points in. But this is actually very directional too. And then I'm going to offset. I feel like I need something in this hemisphere over here. So I'm just going to do a tension dot right there. And I say tension dot because just the close proximity here, you can see how it's cutting off the negative area too, the negative shape there, not negative space. Let's do another one. We're just playing. We're just playing. There's no wrong answers here. We're trying to see, have an understanding of how different things can be, how a frame can be broken up. There could be a big object here. I'm going to actually put a circle that goes off the frame or out of the frame, so it's only going to be a part of a circle. I'm going to do a line here that goes out of frame also. And then let's just do another circle here, but a smaller one. See, even the thickness of our lines sometimes can really add a weight to that shape. So I'm going to go a little thinner with that line. That's kind of an interesting aesthetic, but I like the movement of the negative space here too within the frame. Let's go more geometric, something that has just even more straights to it. These could be, you know, pseudo building shapes, right? Like a landscape of a cityscape. They're all weighted to the bottom of the frame here. So I do want to have something up here. I'm going to put like a round shape up here that could represent in our little aesthetic here. And I'm going to go really thin here with a thin rectangle. And I'm going to put a line across. No, it's going to be a little too heavy, I think, there. I think I'll just keep it at that. It has a nice movement here. I like kind of this that we're feeling here and how it breaks up that negative space. It creates a pattern here too. Boom, boom, boom. You know, we could have something that brings these together a little bit more. Maybe a real thin line just going across here. It creates kind of a horizon line. But now it connects those two together. It becomes a little bottom heavy here. So without getting too heavy, maybe I'll put a little curve here. Without getting too busy. I think that kind of nice. And that could represent, like, you know, a storm or clouds or something like that. Again, we're just playing with shapes right now. keeping it pretty aesthetic. Oh, I lost my shapes up here. Sorry about that, you guys. What did I have? I had a line, a circle, something like that. For the fourth one, let's go bold and break up the shape, the composition here, like this. Think of that as a shaded area. So see how it's just by doing this, adding these really close-up shapes, we're breaking into the composition and creating a new composition within that. I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do a rectangle that goes this way. You know what? I'm going to overlap my rectangle too by cutting into this other shape below. It gives a little dimension to it in a kind of an aesthetic way. And then let's just do two smaller shapes over here. I'm going to do a circle and a little larger rectangle that cuts into this shape and overlaps. Kind of a long rectangle right there. All right, I mean, so these are 4 examples, right? 1, 2, 3, 4. We did them pretty quick. And we're really playing with this idea of breaking up a frame and creating a composition. This is the beginning of storytelling, believe it or not, visual storytelling, because we're creating compositions within a space, and we could think of them as aesthetic or specific or something, you know, organic, whatever it is. We could think of it a lot of ways, and it starts with understanding how design-wise to create appealing compositions. So start with this, have fun, you guys, and I'd love to see what you come up with too on social media. @PumaGuy is me online for the most part. Thanks, guys. Let's go on to the next one.